For inviting me here today. I have to admit, the last time I was in a Unitarian Universalist church was some time ago, and I do have a particular connection to Unitarian Universalism, and that is that I was baptized by a Unitarian Universalist minister, which is a very strange story. That's not something that you ordinarily do, as I understand it. My godparents, you see, are Jewish. My mother is an atheist, and my father is an agnostic. And so nobody else would baptize me. My grandmother rather insisted upon it, just in case I passed away.
What was your grandmother?
I'm sorry?
What was your grandmother?
Oh, my grandmother was Catholic. It was a compromise that seemed to work. Now, I had originally come here to talk about ethical options for the secular, but in the time since I scheduled this talk, and today, a lot of things have happened politically in this country, which I think I would like to address, if you don't mind. And it's something that I think draws us together as humanists and as Unitarian Universalists. So I'm going to give a talk which I prepared particularly in light of what's happened in the last couple of weeks, specifically with the call for constitutional amendment you may have heard of, to take away certain equal protection rights from American society. So with your indulgence. War has been declared in America. The battle lines were drawn some time ago, in the early 80s, when a small but vocal element of fundamentalist Christians declared a certain segment of society to be public enemy number one. Since then, these forces, often posing as something less than they actually are, have been working to take power in the public sphere and transform this country into a form of theocracy. This movement has been referred to as dominionism, and it seeks to reverse the liberalization of society through the last century and the long-standing separation of church and state dictated by the First Amendment of our Constitution. The culture war has been planned for decades. As the forces of fundamentalism in America gathered their resources, consolidated their power, and got elected, until they finally won the ultimate prize. You may have heard of this. The presidency by action of the Supreme Court in 2000. This year, those culture wars are coming to a head, and it may be the last stand for liberal democracy in America. With issues such as reciting under God and the pledge and a proposed constitutional amendment which would define marriage as an exclusively religious institution, and to establish for the first time in 200 years an explicitly religious connection between the federal government and our individual choices and preferences. Given this situation, we ought to discuss our commonalities and gird ourselves for the pitched battle ahead, or we risk losing our long-held religious and philosophical liberties. The first shot across the bow of the culture wars were levied in about 1982, when Christian broadcasters such as Pat Robertson began rallying their followers to become more politically active. Whereas until the 80s, fundamentalist Christians mainly worried about communism, in 1982, Francis Schaeffer, the noteworthy evangelical theologian, called secular humanists the greatest threat to Christianity ever, which was quite a shock to us, because we didn't even know we were called that up until then. On the 700 Club that year, Schaeffer stated, quote, "Today we live in a humanist society. They control the schools, they control public television, they control the media in general." He went on to state, "If you don't revolt against tyranny," and this is what I call the bottom line, is that not only do you have the privilege but the duty to revolt. When people force upon you in society that which is absolutely contrary to the Word of God, and which is really tyranny, we have a right to stand against it as a matter of principle. In 1985, Billy Graham, again on the 700 Club, called upon evangelicals to get themselves politically involved and active. Since about 1982, centered around its hatred and opposition politically to what they consider to be the secular humanist agenda, which include such things as maintaining a strict separation of church and state, liberal views on marriage, keeping creationism out of schools, international cooperation, and a rejection of the notion of the fallen state of man, combined with their own dominionist agenda, which includes such things as reversing Roe v. Wade, eliminating public schooling, and the New Deal, turning the American government into what they call God's dominion, led by evangelicals, etc. Since then, the rank, power, and the reach of this movement, the dominionist movement, have swelled to about 35 million people who are actively involved in supporting that agenda. Explaining this agenda in his book, The Secret Kingdom, which I urge you to read. It's hard sometimes to have to pick up books that are so clearly hateful. But there's another book I would recommend to you too that is a little more timely. That came out in 2000 called Mind Siege. Have any of you heard of that book? Mind Siege. It was a bestseller briefly. It's by a fellow by the name of David Noble, and somebody you may have heard of called Tim LaHaye. Anybody hear of Tim LaHaye? Okay, you need to be familiar with the forces that are at work right now in this country. Tim LaHaye was recently profiled on 60 Minutes, and he has been instrumental in the rise to power of George W. Bush. He works behind the scenes in the fundamentalist movement to get people elected who share their agenda. So you should pick up the book Mind Siege to see where they're coming from. But in The Secret Kingdom, Pat Robertson explains, quote, "It is clear," and this is Pat Robertson telling us exactly what God is saying, "it is clear that God is saying, I gave man